For 7 years, the Alpha King never touched her. Until one night, the palace whispered about her long before dawn. The queen he never claimed. Every servant knew the story. Every noble repeated it behind jeweled fans and silver goblets. Even the youngest maids, barely old enough to carry breakfast trays, had learned never to ask why the Queen's chambers stood alone at the eastern wing of the castle, while the Alpha King's chambers overlooked the western cliffs. 7 years. For 7 long years, Queen Fiona Ashwyn had lived within the grandest palace in the kingdom of Dravenmore. Yet not once had the Alpha King crossed the threshold of her bedroom after the wedding night. Some called her cursed. Others pitied her. Many simply believed the truth was obvious. The Alpha King had never wanted her. On a crisp autumn morning, the palace gardens bloomed with crimson roses kissed by dew. Queen Fiona knelt beside a patch of white lilies. Her sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows as she carefully loosened the soil around their roots with gloved fingers. She wore no crown, only a simple cream-coloured gown embroidered with silver vines. A light cloak rested over her shoulders, shielding her from the cool breeze that swept through the gardens. To anyone passing by, she looked less like the most powerful woman in the kingdom, and more like a gentle noblewoman content to spend her morning among flowers. "Your Majesty." Fiona looked up with a warm smile. An elderly gardener bowed so deeply his back trembled. "You didn't have to help us today." She chuckled softly. "And leave all this work to you? I think not." The old man's weathered face brightened. "You always say that." "Because it's true." She accepted a basket of fresh seedlings from one of the younger gardeners and began planting them herself. Around them, palace servants slowed their work just enough to watch. It happened every week. No queen before Fiona had ever dirtied her hands in the gardens. No queen had remembered the names of stable boys, kitchen maids, or guards stationed at forgotten gates. Yet Fiona remembered all of them. When little Thomas, the baker's son, had fallen ill last winter, she had visited him every evening with warm broth. When the western village lost its harvest to frost, she had ordered the royal granaries opened before the council could even gather. When a palace maid lost her mother, Fiona attended the funeral despite every noble insisting such appearances were beneath a queen. It was impossible not to love her, which made the whispers even crueler. As Fiona rose from the flower beds, brushing soil from her gloves, she heard voices drifting from the marble walkway beyond the hedges. Such a waste. Another woman sighed dramatically. The poor thing. If the Alpha King truly loved her, don't you think he'd have given her an heir by now? Soft laughter followed. Fiona paused. She recognized the voices immediately. Lady Eleanor, Lady Vivian, daughters of 2 influential noble families. They visited the palace often, and every visit brought another round of rumours. "I heard," Lady Vivian whispered, though not quietly enough, "that His Majesty has never even shared a bed with her." "Nonsense. I swear upon the moon goddess." 7 years? So they say. Then why keep her? Politics. They laughed again. Fiona lowered her eyes for only a heartbeat. Then she picked up her basket and continued walking as though she had heard nothing at all. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than arguments. Still, the words always found somewhere to settle inside her heart. By midday, the castle's grand hall buzzed with activity. Merchants had arrived from neighbouring kingdoms. Generals discussed border security. Royal advisors shuffled scrolls across polished oak tables. At the centre of it all sat Alpha King Lucian Dreven, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in black ceremonial armour etched with silver wolf markings. A heavy obsidian crown rested upon his dark hair. His piercing, steel-grey eyes scanned reports with unwavering focus. No one dared interrupt him unless absolutely necessary. He was a ruler, forged by war. At 30 years old, Lucian had defeated rogue pacts, ended 3 territorial conflicts, and united fractured wolf clans beneath one banner. Enemies feared him. Allies respected him. His people trusted him. But no one truly knew him, especially not the nobles who mistook silence for cruelty. "Your Majesty." General Rowan stepped forward. The Eastern Patrol reports increased activity near the mountain pass. Lucien nodded once. "Double the patrols." "Immediately, sire." Another advisor approached. "The southern villages request additional grain." "Approve it." "The Treasury?" "I said approve it." The advisor bowed quickly. "As you command." From across the hall, Fiona entered quietly. She never interrupted council meetings. Instead, she waited patiently near the tall, stained glass windows until Lucian noticed her. He always did, almost instantly. Their eyes met, only for a second. Lucian gave the smallest nod, a greeting so subtle no one else would have recognized it. Fiona returned the gesture. For 7 years, that had been enough. No embrace, no kiss, no affectionate words, only silent understanding. When the meeting ended, Lucian descended from the throne. "Your Majesty." She offered him a respectful bow. "The orphanage in Whitebrook is complete. I received your report. The children move in tomorrow. You've done well." Just 4 words, yet his voice carried genuine sincerity. Fiona smiled. "I'm glad." Another silence settled between them, neither awkward nor comfortable, simply familiar. Lucian glanced toward the open courtyard. "The roses are blooming?" She blinked. "You noticed?" "I pass them every morning." A tiny smile tugged at her lips. "They're finally healthy." He nodded. "They are." Then, just as quickly, duty reclaimed him. "I must meet the council again." "Of course." He inclined his head. She curtsied, and they walked in opposite directions. Watching from a nearby balcony, Lady Eleanor smirked. "Did you see that?" Lady Vivian folded her arms. "Not even a touch." "They speak like strangers." "No," Lady Eleanor corrected with quiet satisfaction. "Strangers are usually warmer." That evening, Fiona returned to her chambers. The eastern wing overlooked the palace gardens she loved so dearly. Candles flickered softly against cream-coloured walls, lined with shelves of books, pressed flowers, and handwritten journals. It was peaceful, beautiful, lonely. Her lady-in-waiting, Clara, helped remove her cloak. "Your Majesty?" Fiona smiled gently. "You heard them too?" Clara looked away. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize. They're cruel. They're curious. They insult you every day." Fiona walked toward the balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. "They only see what everyone else sees." "And what is that?" "A marriage without love." Clara hesitated. "Is that what it is?" Fiona stared at the stars. For several long moments, she said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know anymore." 7 years ago, she had entered this palace knowing exactly what her marriage would be. A duty, a promise, a temporary arrangement until fate found its way home. She had accepted every condition without complaint. She had expected to remain emotionally untouched. She had promised herself she would never hope for more. Yet hope had a quiet way of growing, like flowers pushing through cracks in stone. It arrived in small moments. A cup of tea left outside her study after she worked through the night. A new cloak appearing before winter because someone had noticed hers was wearing thin. Fresh lilies delivered every spring without a note. Lucian never said they were from him. He didn't need to. She knew. Somewhere beneath the cold discipline of the Alpha King was a man capable of remarkable kindness. She simply wasn't sure if that kindness had ever become love, and she feared she would never know. Far across the palace, in the western tower, Lucien stood alone before a roaring fire. In his hand was a small silver pendant, old, worn smooth by time. Inside it rested the faded portrait of a young woman with bright blue eyes, Lady Seraphina Valen, the woman fate had once chosen for him, the woman the kingdom believed had died 7 years ago. Lucien closed the pendant slowly. His expression remained unreadable, but his grip tightened until his knuckles turned white. Then came 3 urgent knocks at the chamber door. "My king!" Lucien turned sharply. "What is it?" The captain of the royal guard entered, breathing hard from his climb up the tower stairs. He dropped to one knee. "There is news from the northern border." Lucien's expression darkened instantly. "What news?" The captain swallowed, then lifted his eyes. "My king." "Our scouts may have found Lady Seraphina." The truth behind the crown. "My king, our scouts may have found Lady Seraphina." The words seemed to steal the warmth from the chamber. Even the flames dancing inside the stone fireplace appeared to freeze as Alpha King Lucien Draven stood motionless, his steel-grey eyes fixed upon the captain kneeling before him. For 7 years he had searched for those words. For 7 years every trail had ended in disappointment, every witness had been mistaken, and every hopeful report had dissolved into silence. He slowly closed the silver pendant in his hand, the tiny portrait of Seraphina disappearing beneath the engraved cover. "Tell me everything," he ordered. Captain Aldrin lowered his head respectfully. 3 days ago, our northern patrol stopped a merchant caravan near Frostfall Pass. One of the travellers recognized Lady Seraphina's portrait from the royal notices. He claimed an elderly healer in the village of White Pine once cared for a noblewoman bearing the same face. The woman had been badly wounded when hunters found her deep within the northern forests nearly 6 years ago. Lucien's expression remained unreadable, though his heart pounded against his ribs. Did the healer confirm her identity? She said the woman remembered nothing of her past, no name, no family, nothing. She remained in the village until early spring this year, when memories began returning little by little. According to the healer, she left only weeks ago, saying she needed to return home. Lucien's jaw tightened. Where is she now? The healer believes she crossed into our territory yesterday. Silence settled over the room. 7 years. 7 years of searching. 7 years of believing fate had taken from him what the moon goddess herself had once promised. If the report was true, everything was about to change. "Prepare 50 riders," Lucien finally said. "We leave before sunrise." Captain Aldrin hesitated. "Your Majesty, should the Queen be informed?" Lucien looked toward the dark window overlooking the palace gardens. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, Fiona would be preparing for another quiet evening, completely unaware that the past she had sacrificed everything for might finally be returning. "Not yet," he answered quietly. "Nothing is certain." "As you command." After the captain departed, Lucien remained standing before the fire. His gaze drifted once more to the closed pendant resting in his palm. 7 years ago, Seraphina had disappeared on the very road that was meant to lead her to the palace. Their wedding had been prepared. The kingdom had gathered. Noble families from every allied pack had arrived to witness the union blessed by fate itself. Then the escort carrying Seraphina had been attacked near Blackthorn Forest. Guards were slaughtered. The carriage burned. No body was ever recovered. The kingdom mourned its future queen. But Lucien never accepted her death. Somewhere deep inside, his wolf had refused to believe their mate no longer lived. For years, he searched every border, every abandoned village, every hidden mountain path. Yet a kingdom could not remain without its king. Nor could neighboring packs ignore the empty throne beside him forever. They demanded he remarry, produce an heir, secure the royal bloodline. Lucien refused every proposal placed before him. Princesses arrived from distant kingdoms carrying gifts and promises of powerful alliances. He rejected them all. Noble daughters competed for his attention. He never looked twice. The council grew desperate. Without a queen, rival kingdoms whispered that Dravenmore had become unstable. Some even prepared for war, believing the Alpha King had lost the favor of the moon goddess. Then, when it seemed no solution remained, one unexpected voice changed the course of history: Fiona Ashwyn. She had stepped forward during a royal council meeting, her hands trembling despite the determination shining in her emerald eyes. "If the kingdom requires a queen," she had said softly, "then allow me to serve until Lady Seraphina is found." Every noble in the chamber had stared at her in disbelief. Even Lucien had been caught off guard. Fiona was the daughter of House Ashwyn, once one of the kingdom's oldest noble families. But after her parents died during a plague, their fortune crumbled. Rather than cling to fading titles, Fiona devoted herself to healing villages and caring for orphaned children. She had no ambition for power, no desire for wealth. She simply wished to prevent a kingdom already burdened by grief from falling into chaos. The council had argued for hours. Some mocked the idea, others praised her courage. Lucien had remained silent until everyone finished speaking. Finally, he looked directly at Fiona. "Do you understand what you're offering?" She met his gaze without fear. "I do. If Seraphina returns, then I will step aside." "Without protest?" "Without protest." "You would spend years beside a husband who cannot truly be yours." Fiona's smile had been heartbreakingly gentle. "If it protects the kingdom? Yes." That answer had lingered in Lucien's mind ever since. Their marriage was held a month later beneath the sacred moon altar. Before the ceremony, Lucien spoke only one promise to Fiona. "I will never dishonor you with lies." She nodded. "Then I ask only one thing in return." He waited. "Treat me with kindness." He had answered with a single word: always. And for 7 years, despite every rumor whispered throughout the kingdom, he had kept that promise. He had never humiliated her, never raised his voice, never allowed anyone to insult her in his presence. He made certain she possessed every authority due to a queen. Yet he also kept another promise, the one he made silently to himself on the night Seraphina vanished. Until he knew the truth of his missing mate's fate, he would never claim another woman as his Luna in body or soul. It was a decision born from honor. But honor, he had come to realize, often carried a cruel price, because somewhere between royal duties, shared meals, quiet conversations, and 7 years of silent companionship, Fiona Ashwyn had become far more than a temporary queen. She had become the one person whose presence made the vast palace feel less empty, and that frightened him more than any battlefield ever had. Unaware of the storm gathering within the Western Tower, Fiona sat by the fireplace in her own chambers, reading letters from villages across the kingdom. One requested medicine for a sick child. Another invited her to the autumn harvest festival. A third thanked her for rebuilding homes destroyed by flooding. Clara smiled as she watched her queen carefully answer every letter herself. "You could ask the royal scribes to do this." Fiona shook her head gently. "People deserve to know someone truly read their words." Before Clara could reply, another knock echoed through the room. A young palace servant entered, carrying a small wooden box tied with a silver ribbon. A delivery for Her Majesty? Fiona frowned. From whom? The servant smiled nervously. There was no name. Fiona untied the ribbon and slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested a single white lily, freshly picked, perfectly preserved. Her fingers brushed the delicate petals as warmth spread quietly through her heart. White lilies, her favourite flower. Every spring, every autumn, every winter. They appeared without explanation. Clara looked at her knowingly. Still no note? Fiona smiled to herself as she gently closed the box. No. Outside her window, the first snowflake of the season drifted silently through the night air, unnoticed by everyone within the palace. It was said among the oldest wolves that the year's first snowfall always arrived before fate changed someone's life forever. Neither Fiona nor Lucian knew it yet. But before another moon had passed, the promises made 7 years ago would be tested in ways neither of them had ever imagined. 7 years of silence. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of silver mist that clung to the towers of Dravenmore Palace. From the highest balcony, Queen Fiona Ashwyn watched the first rays of sunlight spill across the kingdom she had quietly come to love as her own. The castle below slowly awakened with the sounds of servants preparing breakfast, guards changing shifts, and stable hands leading horses into the courtyard. Another ordinary day had begun, or so she believed. She had no way of knowing that before the sun set, destiny would begin unraveling the peaceful life she had spent 7 years building. Clara entered her chambers carrying a neatly folded gown of deep emerald velvet embroidered with delicate silver thread. Her Majesty has a full day ahead, she said cheerfully. The council requested your presence at the harvest meeting. The children's school in Riverstone sent another invitation, and the royal healer wishes to discuss the new infirmary. Fiona smiled as Clara fastened the gown around her shoulders. Then we'd better not keep anyone waiting. Together they walked through the palace corridors, exchanging greetings with every servant they passed. Fiona knew each of them by name. She asked one maid whether her injured ankle had healed. She congratulated a young guard whose wife had recently given birth to twins. She even paused to compliment the head cook on the wonderful aroma drifting from the kitchens. Every conversation was genuine, every smile sincere. Long before the people had begun calling her the heart of Dravenmore, Fiona had simply believed kindness cost nothing. Yet those small acts had transformed the kingdom more than any royal decree ever could. In villages across the realm, mothers told their children stories about the gentle queen who visited orphanages without warning and remembered birthdays of children she had only met once. Farmers proudly displayed letters bearing her elegant signature. Elderly widows whispered blessings whenever her name was spoken. To the people, she was not merely their queen. She was family. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of the royal court. As Fiona entered the council chamber, conversations abruptly quieted. Noblemen rose respectfully, but behind practiced smiles lingered the same familiar curiosity she had endured for years. Lady Eleanor leaned toward Lady Vivian, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at her." Vivian followed her gaze. "She seems unusually happy today. Perhaps she's finally convinced His Majesty to visit her chambers." The women laughed softly behind jeweled fans. Fiona heard every word. She simply continued walking until she reached her seat beside the throne. Moments later, the great doors opened once more. Alpha King Lucian Draven entered with his usual commanding presence. Every conversation ceased instantly. He acknowledged the council with a brief nod before taking his place. As always, his gaze found Fiona first. "Good morning." It was a simple greeting, quiet enough that only she heard it. Yet after 7 years, she had learned to treasure even those small moments. Good morning, Your Majesty, she replied with a gentle smile. The meeting began. Reports flowed one after another. Crop yields exceeded expectations. Trade routes remained secure. Construction of the new bridge over the Silver River was nearly complete. Throughout the discussions, Fiona offered thoughtful suggestions that impressed even the oldest advisors. When debate arose over funding another village clinic, she calmly presented records showing how the previous clinics had reduced illness and increased productivity across neighbouring regions. The council unanimously approved her proposal. Lord Cedric, one of the senior ministers, leaned toward another nobleman afterward. The Queen understands the people better than any of us. Indeed, the other admitted reluctantly. She governs with compassion rather than pride. Across the chamber, Lucien heard every word. Though his face remained unreadable, something deep within him stirred with quiet satisfaction. He had witnessed Fiona transform the kingdom one village at a time. She never sought praise, never demanded recognition. Even the projects she personally funded were often credited to the crown rather than herself. She believed good deeds required no applause. That selflessness had slowly become impossible for him to ignore. There had been countless moments over the years when he nearly abandoned every promise he had made. The first came during their second winter together. Fiona had fallen dangerously ill after spending days treating victims of a fever spreading through the eastern villages. For 3 nights, she drifted in and out of consciousness, while royal healers struggled to lower her fever. Lucien never left the corridor outside her chambers. He refused every request to rest. When the physicians finally emerged at dawn, announcing she would recover, none of them mentioned the Alpha King, whose desperate pacing had nearly worn grooves into the marble floor. Another memory surfaced from years later. During a royal banquet, an arrogant visiting duke mocked Fiona for having no children after so many years of marriage. Before anyone else could react, Lucien stood so abruptly that the entire hall fell silent. His voice carried the icy authority that had made enemy alphas surrender without battle. "Speak of my queen with respect," he had warned, "or leave my kingdom before sunrise." The duke departed before dessert was served. Fiona had thanked him afterward. Lucien merely answered, "No one insults what belongs under my protection." At the time, he convinced himself those words referred only to his duty as king, but somewhere inside, his wolf had quietly disagreed. After the council meeting ended, Fiona stepped into the palace library, her favourite sanctuary whenever responsibilities became overwhelming. Shelves, stretching from floor to ceiling, held thousands of ancient books collected over centuries. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting colourful patterns across polished wooden floors. Fiona selected a weathered volume about medicinal herbs before settling beside the fireplace. She had barely opened the first page when footsteps echoed softly behind her. She looked up. Lucien stood in the doorway. Neither spoke immediately. Silence had never been uncomfortable between them. It was simply another language they both understood. Finally, Lucien approached the table and placed a small parchment beside her book. "The budget for the new orphanage has been approved." Fiona's eyes brightened. "Already?" "Construction begins next week." Genuine happiness spread across her face. "Thank you." Lucien watched her smile for a heartbeat longer than he intended. Strange how victories on the battlefield never filled him with the quiet peace he felt whenever she looked at him like that. He quickly forced himself to step back. "There's one more matter." Fiona tilted her head curiously. "Tomorrow evening the ambassadors from Westhaven arrive. A formal banquet will be held. I'll make the preparations? Wear the sapphire gown?" She blinked in surprise. The one you commissioned last spring? He nodded once. It suits you. Before she could respond, Lucienne turned and walked away. Fiona remained seated, staring after him long after he disappeared down the corridor. Clara entered moments later, carrying several documents. She found Fiona smiling absent-mindedly at nothing in particular. "Your Majesty?" Fiona looked up quickly. "Hmm?" Clara laughed softly. "You didn't even hear me come in." Fiona closed her book. "I was thinking." Clara raised an eyebrow knowingly. "About the king?" Fiona looked away, a faint blush warming her cheeks. He said, "The sapphire gown suits me." Clara smiled. "Perhaps His Majesty notices more than he lets on." Fiona's smile slowly faded. Perhaps. But deep inside, she knew better than to mistake kindness for affection. 7 years had taught her that hope, if left unchecked, could become far more painful than loneliness. Meanwhile, in the Western Tower, Captain Aldrin returned from the royal stables. "Everything is prepared, Your Majesty. 50 riders await your command." Lucian stood before the window, overlooking the distant northern mountains barely visible against the horizon. Somewhere beyond those peaks, answers awaited him. Perhaps even the woman he had once believed would share his future. Yet for reasons he refused to examine too closely, the thought no longer brought the certainty it once had. Instead, it filled him with something unfamiliar. Dread. He closed his eyes briefly, unaware that his wolf was already whispering the truth his heart had spent 7 years refusing to hear. The woman who returned, night settled over Dravenmore like a velvet cloak, wrapping the palace in silence, broken only by the distant footsteps of guards patrolling the stone walls. In the eastern wing, Fiona stood alone on her balcony, her fingers resting lightly against the cold marble railing as she gazed across the moonlit gardens. Thousands of tiny lanterns glowed along the winding pathways, casting warm pools of light over the white lilies she had planted with her own hands. 7 years. It was strange how quickly they had passed. Sometimes it felt as though she had arrived at the palace only yesterday, standing before the moon altar in a wedding gown she had never dreamed of wearing, promising herself she would never ask for more than the agreement she had accepted. Other nights, like this one, those same 7 years felt impossibly long, as though she had lived an entire lifetime inside a marriage balanced delicately between duty and hope. She remembered the wedding with startling clarity. The grand cathedral had been overflowing with nobles dressed in their finest silks. Every kingdom allied with Dravenmore had sent representatives to witness the ceremony. Yet despite the music, the flowers, and the celebrations, an unmistakable sadness had lingered in the air. Everyone knew another woman should have been standing where Fiona stood. Everyone knew the bride beside the Alpha King was never meant to wear the crown. When the High Priest asked Lucian whether he accepted Fiona Ashwyn as his lawful queen, there had been the slightest pause before he answered. Only a heartbeat, barely noticeable to anyone else. But Fiona had noticed. She noticed everything. She remembered how his voice remained steady despite the hesitation. "I do." Then came her turn. She had answered without the smallest pause. "I do?" Not because she believed he loved her, not because she expected their marriage to become a romance, but because she had made peace with sacrificing her own dreams if it meant protecting the kingdom from uncertainty. After the ceremony, while the celebrations echoed throughout the palace, Lucien escorted her to the eastern wing. He opened the doors to the chambers that would become her home and spoke words she would never forget. "These rooms are yours alone. You may change anything you wish." She smiled politely. "Thank you." He remained standing near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable. "If you ever feel trapped here..." He hesitated before continuing. Tell me. Fiona had looked around the unfamiliar room before meeting his eyes once more. I won't be trapped, Your Majesty. Why are you so certain? She smiled gently. Because no place where kindness exists can truly become a prison. Lucien had stared at her for several silent moments before giving a respectful nod. Then he quietly left. That was the first night of their marriage. He never entered those chambers again, not once in 7 years. Yet somehow, despite the loneliness, he had never allowed her to feel abandoned. Every winter, fresh firewood arrived before the first snowfall. Every spring, white lilies mysteriously appeared outside her door. Whenever she travelled through the kingdom, additional guards were assigned without her asking. He always noticed when she skipped meals during busy weeks, sending food to her study under the excuse that the royal kitchen had prepared too much. They never spoke about these small acts of care. They simply existed between them like invisible threads neither dared acknowledge. Fiona sighed softly as the cool breeze brushed against her face. Your Majesty? Clara's voice came gently from inside the room. There's someone here to see you? Fiona turned. Standing just inside the doorway was Lord Cedric, the kingdom's oldest advisor. His usually composed face looked unusually troubled. Fiona immediately sensed something was wrong. Lord Cedric? The elderly man bowed respectfully. Forgive the late hour, Your Majesty. Please come in. He stepped forward slowly, removing his gloves with trembling hands. His Majesty departed the palace an hour ago. Fiona frowned. At this hour? Cedric nodded. He left with 50 royal riders. Was there an attack? No. Then why would he leave without informing the council? Cedric lowered his gaze. For several long seconds he remained silent. Fiona's heartbeat quickened. Lord Cedric. He finally looked up. Scouts returned from the northern border this evening. Fiona waited. They believe. Another pause. They believe Lady Seraphina has been found. The room suddenly felt very still. Clara gasped quietly behind her, but Fiona remained motionless, her expression calm, despite the sharp ache blooming inside her chest. She had always known this day might come. In fact, she had prepared herself for it from the very beginning. 7 years earlier, she had signed an agreement witnessed by the Royal Council itself. If Seraphina ever returned, Fiona would relinquish the crown without objection. No arguments, no resentment, no delay. She had promised. And Fiona Ashwyn never broke a promise. Lord Cedric watched her carefully, expecting tears, anger, perhaps even disbelief. Instead, she simply smiled. It was a small smile, gentle, almost peaceful. Then the moon goddess has finally answered His Majesty's prayers. Cedric's heart sank. Of all the reactions he had imagined, this one hurt the most. Your Majesty. Fiona lifted a hand softly, stopping him before he could offer sympathy. Please don't worry about me. Her voice remained remarkably steady. This has always been the agreement. After the advisor quietly excused himself, Clara hurried to Fiona's side. You can't possibly mean that. Fiona looked toward the window, where snow had begun falling more heavily over the palace gardens. Why not? Because this is your home, Clara exclaimed, tears filling her eyes. The people adore you. You've given 7 years of your life to this kingdom. Fiona smiled sadly. And I don't regret a single day. But what about the king? That question lingered between them. Fiona lowered her eyes. What about him? Clara stepped closer. Don't tell me you've never noticed the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The way he always asks about your safety first whenever you travel. The lilies that appear every season. The cloak he replaced without saying a word. The sapphire gown he specifically asked you to wear tomorrow night. Fiona closed her eyes briefly. Kindness isn't the same as love. Sometimes it is. Not this time. She opened her eyes again, forcing another gentle smile. He has simply kept the promise he made 7 years ago. Clara wanted to argue. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her queen in a tight embrace. Fiona returned the hug, though her gaze remained fixed on the falling snow outside. For the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to whisper the words she had buried deep within her heart, so quietly that only the winter wind seemed to hear them. I wish, just once, he had chosen me. At that very moment, miles north of the palace, Lucian and his riders galloped beneath the moonlight toward White Pine Village. Snow swirled around them as hooves thundered across the frozen road. His wolf grew increasingly restless with every passing mile, sensing that destiny lay somewhere ahead. Shortly before dawn, the riders reached the small mountain village. An elderly healer waited outside a humble wooden cottage, clutching a lantern against the bitter cold. She bowed deeply as Lucien dismounted. Your Majesty, I've been expecting you. Lucien stepped forward, his voice calm, despite the storm raging inside him. Where is she? The old woman looked toward the cottage door. Inside. Lucien's heartbeat echoed through the silent night as he slowly climbed the wooden steps. His hand closed around the iron handle. For 7 years he had searched without rest. For 7 years he had wondered whether this moment would ever come. Taking one slow breath, he pushed the door open. A young woman sitting beside the fireplace turned at the sound. Her bright blue eyes widened with disbelief. The cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the wooden floor. Tears instantly filled her eyes as she whispered the one name she had carried in her heart through 7 years of darkness. Lucien. End of part 1. If you enjoyed part 1 of Fiona and Lucien's story, then you're going to love part 2. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. As part 2 begins, the woman everyone believed was lost has finally returned. But after 7 years, is she still the one who holds the Alpha King's heart?